Hello, I'm Odin, and today I'm going to make another prop from My Hero Academia. It's Deku's Air Force gloves. I picked up a pair of soft leather work gloves to start with. I checked the leather for waterproofing. A water drop beads up on the surface of the leather, so these gloves have a waterproof coating. Removing the waterproofing is actually easy. Just wipe the leather down with rubbing alcohol. It really is just as simple as that. Now the leather can be easily painted with acrylics and glued. I decided to remove the rawhide from the palm of the glove. The holes from the stitching will still be there, but they won't have that work glove look anymore. If you just get a pair of driver-style gloves instead, this piece is not there. The palms of these gloves will be painted, so I wiped down where the rawhide was, and then all of the palms again. I use a foam ruler that I made to measure how much foam I will need to start the cuffs. This foam ruler is the same thickness as the foam that I want to use, so it'll have an accurate measurement. For me, just under 12 inches will barely slip over my hand. I want complete rings of foam. It'll be simpler that way. So the ring of the cuff should be about the same as the palm of the hand. Mine's 4, so I should make it 4 inches wide. I might make it a little less because it seems like it's going to be a little much. The first ring was a test. I used 10mm HC foam to make my cuffs. I apply contact cement to the ends and wait for it to dry, and then I can stick them together, making the rings. The next layer I want is 4mm foam, so I use a 4mm ruler. But this time I want to make a pattern, so I cut a piece of cardstock. There are a series of vents that need to go around this layer, so I measure the part again in millimeters, and then divide that and make a 17mm strip to use as a guide. That's because I need to mark off 20 sets of 17mm onto my pattern, and a guide is going to be more accurate for me than just making the marks from a ruler. I need 20 so I can cut out every other one and have 10 vents with equal spacing. I need 2 of these, and a pattern is easier for me to trace onto the foam. When I glue the vent layer on, I keep one edge flat on the table because I want the edges to be flush. And I made sure the seam was in between the high spots. Next, I want a layer of 6mm foam, so I measure with the 6mm ruler. And I cut a strip of 6mm foam. The only detail in this layer is one of the long edges is cut on a 45-degree angle. Before I glue them on this time, I paint the flat sides black. Now this is the side that'll glue to the cuffs that I made. Because I'm also going to paint each of the vents black on the cuffs. I think it'll be easier to paint the small vent holes now rather than after they're glued together. Once the paint is dry, I can use contact cement to attach the layers together. The 45-degree edge is the one that I'm keeping flat on the table. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I've got the vents put in like I want. It's got a decent size. It barely fits over my hand, so it's as tight as I can really get it to be around my wrist. I'll actually glue the glove to it when the time comes. What I need to do is make it's like a cuff. It's like the cuff of a gauntlet, right, that goes on top because they're gauntlets. So I'm going to do that from 2 layers. I'm going to do a layer of 4 and then a slightly smaller layer of 2mm foam over it, because having the 2 separate layers glued together will help keep the curve on the edges that aren't attached. Now I know that Air Force gloves are actually supposed to open up and become the big funneling Air Force gauntlets, but I'm making the closed version because I don't want to do anything that mechanical today. I use my 4mm ruler to figure out the size that I want. There is extra on the sides to this cuff layer, and they need to hang down off the center of the cuff. So what if I just make it an even number and it's just what it is? I think I like that plan the most so far. So hey, look, back to 12 again. All right. I start a new pattern from cardstock again, and the front corner is going to be cut on an angle. Oh, 1.5 inches is too much. 2, 3, oh, no. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it's 2 inches. These are 1/2 inch. You gotta remember what your scales are, it helps, right? You know what, you got rulers. What if you use a ruler? I cut the corners off both sides and figure out the size for the center cutout part. I cut 2 of these from 4mm foam, and I make some marks on the side that I want to glue to the main cuff. I want them to both have the same shape when they're stuck on. Yeah, like that. Okay. I measure again for a 2mm foam layer, and I cut another piece. Yeah, it looks okay then. But this layer has all the details. I include marks for where the blue trim is and a center dot for the golden circles. I trace and cut my 2mm pieces and use the trim marks on the 2mm foam to make panel lines for the paint. I tried to not cut all the way through the 2mm foam, and the heat gun opens the cut into a larger panel line. This is actually optional. I have a heat gun, so I want a large panel line just for the color separation. But if you don't have a heat gun, just use a pencil line as a paint guide. The pattern is traced for placement onto the 4mm piece. These lines are a guide, and the exact placement will change when both parts are curved. I glue the 4mm layer on first, and I make sure that both sides have an equal amount of overhang. When I glue the 2mm layer on, I'm careful to not stretch the foam because that'll warp the final piece. Only the front edge lines up with the 4mm layer. All the other sides are just a little bit smaller. I decide to remove the trim from the work glove. It should slide on over my hand much easier now.
That is a tight fit.
I mark on the glove where the glue line will need to be. This needed some correction later, but it was a great start. I traced a circle and cut out the 4 buttons for the cuffs. And I had an idea on how to make those knuckle vents. Each vent will be made using a 2mm T-piece that wraps over a 6mm squared base. I stick all the tiny parts to some blue tape to hold them for gluing, and then I apply glue to 3 sides of the 6mm square rods. When I wrap the T-piece over the 6mm rod, I make sure it sticks out just a little. This will make an opening on the front of each one when it's glued onto the glove. After all 10 are glued, I cut an angle into the bottom so that the front vent is larger than the thinner back part. I stick all 10 of the knuckle vents and the 4 buttons onto some blue tape, which will hold them securely for a coat of black paint. This black is a base coat for the gold that I'll paint them later. Because I had pre-painted all the vents black, I decided to just hand paint the white base color onto the cuffs. It takes a few coats of white to really cover the foam and to get an even coat of paint. I thinned the paint a little to keep brush marks from building up and ruining the finish. And that also meant more coats of paint.
All right, so it took 6 or 8 coats to get it to this point, but I'm ready to move on to the blue, so I'll paint that on now.
It'll take just 2 coats of the blue paint for the stripe, and 2 coats of gold paint for all the little pieces. But I left the inside of each knuckle vent black. The palm of the gloves need to be painted teal. Now you can use acrylic paints in the leather, but it's suggested to thin the paint with water to help the leather absorb the paint. Only the palm is teal, the back of the glove is still white. And that dividing line is not always the same as the seam line on the glove. I used a wooden dowel to help paint each finger and to get in between each finger. The second coat went on much better. And I'm going to stop with just 2 coats because it'll crack easier if it's thick. I carefully apply contact cement to the cuff and to the buttons, and then stick them on right over the center dot that I had made for placement. After the palms dry, I figure out where I'm going to place the knuckle vents. Then I paint the thick black line that runs from each knuckle back to the cuff. You notice it's whiter at the knuckle. Before I glue the little gold pieces on, I glue the gloves to the cuffs, securely affixing them in place. And this needs to be a really good solid connection because I'm going to be pulling on the cuffs to get the gloves on. Then I can place each of the little knuckle vents onto the back of the gloves. Most of the materials I used are available for order, and you can have it shipped right to you. I'll put a list and some links in the description.
These are really cool in the show, and I'm very happy to have a set that I can actually put on. This is cool. I'm happy with how these turned out. And okay, yeah, they don't function. Not that they could. I don't have a quirk to really make them work, but they don't open up. That's okay. I wanted to make them simple. The whole point was to make them simple. They're kind of foolproof because they're just tubes of foam, right? They're not going to fall apart on me. And then making them a tight fit was also intentional, but I might have made them a little bit too tight. I really don't think I can get my right hand on once the left one's on, or more specifically, I don't think I can get the gloves back off safely without having someone here to assist me and lend me a hand. So maybe make them just a little bit bigger than I did. I pretty much did exactly the diameter around my hand. You might want to give yourself a little more space. And yeah, you can do that for yourself if you want, because all the pattern pieces I made, I'm going to put those in a file. There's going to be a link in the description. It's free. You can download my pattern and you can make your own set of Deku's Air Force gloves. You can also make his mask if you like, but that's a separate video. The pattern's totally free. And if you noticed, I didn't use any power tools. So all you're going to need to do this is a razor knife, a straight edge, and some glue, and some paint. And probably a couple other things I'm forgetting. But for the most part, that's all it is. You don't need anything that plugs in. I used a heat gun, but you don't need the heat gun. So if you'd like, get yourself the pattern. You can make them out of foam, because I like making things out of foam, but trust me, I understand. There are lots of different ways that you can make your own set of Deku Air Force gloves. But this is how Odin makes. I made the cuffs kind of tight. That was intentional, right? I actually talked about wanting to do that. Well, success. I'm going to need help getting the other one on. I'm going to need someone to give me a hand to put on the other hand. And there's the train. It's a train. It's a freight train, a couple miles long. I want to thank Danny Scarberry, Ben Lamb, and all of my Patreon supporters. My Patreon support is the #1 thing that makes this show possible. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe. Have an idea for something for me to make? Please leave a comment below. And if you make any of these projects, you can send me a picture.